Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-09-25. Story 1, My primary school had strange rituals. When I was a kid, I moved around a lot. My dad first left my mum when I was 5, but he came back every now and then until my mum finally had enough recorded evidence for the police to take her abuse claims seriously. Even after he wasn't allowed anywhere near, that house where I spent my first years had too many bad memories. My mum took me away, far away, so that we could start again, have a better life somewhere new. But jobs were hard to come by and the cities didn't have time for someone trying to rebuild their happiness. She always worked a couple of part-time jobs at once, and I know it killed her to have to be away from me at all. When I started asking why she always ate so much less than me, she told me she was on a diet. I didn't know what that meant, so she told me it was an eating program that would make her happy. I was young, and I stopped worrying about it after that. Whenever a better situation would come up, less working hours, higher pay, or a kinder heart, we'd drive for a day or two down to a new place. My mum made a game out of it, turned it all into a grand adventure. Of course, I know the reality of the situation now, but my happiest memories are still on the road, singing rock songs with my mum and being able to choose my own snacks from the gas stations we'd pass. So as a result I changed schools a lot as I grew up. It didn't bother me too much, because it felt like a natural part of life to me. I was never around long enough to form friendships that were hard to let go. I was just eternally in transit. I came to class, I talked to other kids, but like a ghost, I was never really there. In grade 3, my mother had a friend of her sister who offered to help cover some grocery costs, and get my mum a decent job. So we moved nearby, and I started at a new school, Carnan Primary. My teacher there was Ms. Varia. She always wore white gloves and a long dress, her hair was tied up behind her head so that the outline of her forehead was obnoxious and jarring, and when she smiled, her lips pressed together so tightly it looked as if she were holding back slugs that were inside her mouth. I said exactly that, once, to another kid. But we'll get to that later. Ms. Varia's words were usually nice, but the way they came out of her like a hiss of steam, and the stiff way she would walk from desk to desk, peering over your shoulder, meant that no one liked her anyway. All the teachers were like that, to be honest. And they all wore gloves. They'd watch us during playtime, standing at the corners of the oval, and staring at the children in the playground. It was a pretty nice-looking school, to be honest, and there were trees all around the edge of the property, both inside and outside the school fence. They were great for playing hide-and-seek, but sometimes you duck behind a tree and one of the teachers would just be standing there, staring. Miri told me that if you got too close to one of the teachers, their heads would spin, bang, and look at you instead. So whenever I saw a teacher, I'd just run to another tree a little bit away and hide there instead. Miri was the popular girl. I don't know why she was, though, because she was mean to a lot of kids. She scared people by telling stories, like the one about the old lady janitor whose closet was full of people without faces. But she was especially mean to this one girl whose name I forget, and me of course, because we weren't as well off as her. Sometimes she'd sniff at our clothing, make jokes about living in trailers, or poke fun at the color of the other girl's eyes. Apparently they were bright green, so Miri would always call her snake, or alligator. I suppose we'll call her Allie for now. Allie would try to tell the teachers about Miri teasing her, but the teachers would always shrug her off, even when she was crying. Eventually, Allie slapped Miri. And of course, as it always goes, Allie was the one who got in trouble. That's when I first learnt about the happy room. If you got into serious trouble, the teachers would tell you that you've made them very unhappy. And then they would take you to the happy room so that you could learn how to make them feel better again. At first I thought it was just like detention. But when Allie came back to class after going to the happy room, her eyes were wide, and her eyelids were shaking as if all she wanted to do was shut them, but she couldn't do it. I tried to ask her about what happened there, but she would never say a word about it. Allie hated Miri more and more after that, but Miri kept pushing it further and further, and occasionally Allie would snap. Every time this happened, she'd be dragged, screaming, to the happy room. A couple of other kids started getting in trouble a lot, too, and they were pretty much the same. They'd go in screaming, they'd come out silent, shivering, staring. One of the kids got sent to the happy room for something really weird. As a dare, when Miss Varia walked past his desk, he snatched her glove off. She gave out such a gasp that he burst out laughing, until she took the glove back and twisted two of his fingers. I can remember this much. His right hand, his pointer finger and his middle finger, had been twisted 360 degrees around each other like a corkscrew. Some of the bones in those fingers had snapped and pierced his skin, poking out at strange angles. And the parts of his fingers where those bones should have been, red, glistening and floppy. He screamed and screamed and screamed, and Miss Varia picked him up, practically shouting to the class, "I can see I've made you very unhappy, Timmy, so why don't I take you to the happy room so that you can feel better?" She stormed off, carrying the boy in her arms. A few minutes later, they both came back into the room quietly. The boy's hand was totally fixed. There was no evidence of an injury at all. No blood, no wound, no scar, nothing. And like all the others, his eyelids were stuck open, twitching. Miss Varia looked at us all, and said, slowly and deliberately, "Nothing has happened here. And if you even think about telling anyone about it, nothing might happen to you too." In the end, people just pretended it never happened. But a lot of people stopped coming to the school. I can't remember exactly how many, or specifically who. But the class started feeling strangely small, that's all. One day, Miri was making fun of how people looked. I don't know why I still wanted to impress her, but I did. So I said the best insult I'd ever thought of, that Miss Varia looked like she was always trying to hold slugs in her mouth. Miri stopped at once and told me I shouldn't have said that. I got angry at her, and I told her she only didn't like my insult because it came from me, and she didn't like me because I wasn't filthy rich and spoiled like her and her family. Miri was furious, and told me that I needed to shut my mouth, that my family wouldn't even be afloat if not for hers. Turns out that gracious benefactor to my mum was Miri's dad. I told Miri I'd rather starve than have to hang out with people like her. She stormed off, and I realized what was going to happen. Sure enough, she came back with Miss Varia, who held my hand in her white, cold glove, and said, "You've made me very unhappy. Come with me to the happy room." I didn't want to do it. But I couldn't say no either. She led me back into the school buildings, through corridors, past our classroom. I said, "Can I please grab a piece of paper to make notes?" She laughed and said I wouldn't need any, but I said please, I want to learn properly. She tutted impatiently and let me into the room. I put a pen into my pocket and the notebook into my armpit. She resumed the walk, taking me past the legendary janitor's closet, and to a basic wooden door with a little sign saying Happy Room on it. An old, peeling sticker of a smiley face was molding on the corner of the sign. Miss Varia pushed me through the door and sat me down. "Let me show you something. Something special. I want you to watch very closely." She smiled, her gross, ugly smile, with her lips pressed together, and then something slipped out of the corners of her lips. It was almost, no, not quite, like a slug, but it was a deep, dark, red, that stained the desk it dropped on as it wriggled around. Miss Varia laughed, and as her mouth opened, a flood of leeches poured down her face, like one giant, writhing creature growing rapidly, sending out short fat tentacles to cover the desk. I tried to look away, I tried to close my eyes, but for some reason I just couldn't. I had to see it all, coming closer and closer towards me. She took off her gloves, and I could see her palms for the first time. They had all these little black holes in them, and deep inside, I could make out something moving, twisting. Her body was full of leeches. She unbuttoned her shirt and her breasts spilled out, also dotted with all these holes that seemed to breathe, seemed to shudder and giggle like mouths covering her body. She stood naked in front of me, bending and stretching her honeycomb skin as underneath it all, something coiled and uncoiled, dark red, oozing, crawling. I couldn't look away. but in my moment of panic, my arms flung themselves around, the notebook dropping to the floor, immediately overwhelmed by a wave of leeches on the floor. Every surface of the room was covered in them, and they were coming up the legs of my seat. It was like being in a stomach, like I would be digested by all the moving, spitting, staining red, like I would be covered in sticky, crawling slime, feel all their teeth on my skin. And Ms. Varia was reaching forwards for me with her breathing holes, her hands, and if I screamed as I was covered in the leeches, they would come into my mouth and slither down my tongue, fill my throat, slip inside of me and eat me inside out. And then my hand felt it, the pen. I grabbed onto it and slammed it into Ms. Varia's reaching hand, and I heard a howl I can't describe. The spell was broken, and I could close my eyes, but I didn't want to. I had to get out. She pulled the pen out, stained, lurched forward and stabbed my arm with the pen. I yelled with pain as the hot leech blood mixed with my own inside the wound, gasping for breath as I pulled the pen out, and pierced the pulsing mass beneath her skin again, and again, and again, and again. The leeches were retreating off the floor, off the walls, off the door, and as soon as I could see a path out, I leapt off the chair and out the door. I was in a panic, and I was disoriented. Which way had I come down this corridor? I ran in a random direction, and I passed doorway after doorway, each labeled Happy Room and with a fading sticker. This wasn't the right way. I needed to go in the other direction, but I couldn't stop myself from looking through one of the windows. It was Allie in her happy room, and this time it was the janitor who was unfurling, and the window in the door was blocked out by the squirming dark pustules pressed against the glass. I ran back down the corridor in the other direction, but sooner than I thought it would. The door of that room opened and the old lady janitor was steering Allie down the corridor towards me. Allie's facial features were dripping off her, like ink, her green eyes drooping and running down her face, off her chin and onto the floor. And then I didn't know who it was. I barely knew who she was by then, but in that moment I lost any recognition, any memory of who Allie was. She became nobody. She no longer existed, in the past or in the present or in the forever future. The janitor saw me, and roared that horrible, impossible sound. I opened the nearest door to run into, but it was the closet, and it was just like all the stories, all the faceless bodies inside that still held themselves in pain, suffering eternally but forgotten completely. I turned, and I don't know how I managed it, running as fast as I could, anywhere I could, but I made it out of the building. Bleeding, stained red with leeches. All the other children screamed when they saw me running out. I wanted to get out of the school. But the teachers saw me too. And they were all around the fence, coming out from behind the trees, snarling at me. There was no way past. I wanted to fall onto the floor and cry, but my mum, if I didn't come back home, what would she? I had to make it back, for her, and with every bit of energy that my aching, burning body could possibly give, I lunged at one of the teachers, knocking them down. The gates were locked and the fences were high, but I was a kid, I was poor, I was weak, but I'll be damned if I didn't know how to climb a tree. It was like fire up my forearm as the stab wound stretched with each pull up a branch, a murmuring hole on my own body, laughing at my attempt to escape, but I made it to the top of the tree, and I rolled off a branch hanging over the fence, falling through layers of leaves onto the grass outside the school grounds. I ran all the way back home. The teachers didn't follow. I don't think they could leave the school at all. You know, I only remembered this a few weeks ago. My mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer earlier this year. It had already spread to her pelvis by that point, so it wasn't really a matter of treatment anymore, it was just a matter of time. In those last months, sometimes she'd stare into the distance as if she was missing something she couldn't explain. I was going through the attic for anything she might like to see again. Before, well, we didn't have pictures from my childhood, but we had little things that meant something to us. A mug she used every day. A blanket. And then I found the birth certificates. One for me and one for Bethany. We were born on the same day. We were twins. Initially I thought it couldn't be real. But then snippets started coming back, of my time at Carnan Primary. And eventually I pieced it together, to what you read above. It turns out the school burnt down a few years back. Some crazed parent lit the whole place up, nothing left but ashes. But I know that even if there were any bodies left, they wouldn't have been identifiable, or they wouldn't have been human at all. Whatever was living there, in the school, in the teachers, I don't think it fed off people's bodies. I think it fed off their existences. Off people's memories and experiences with them. And once they consumed it all, it's as if they never existed and they just fade out of your life without you ever realizing. There might be traces of them left around, here and there, but the human mind does a great job of filling in unexplainable holes. When I visited my mum for what would be one of the last times, she asked if she could see my scar. I rolled up my sleeve, and she kissed it. She cried and told me she was sorry that she wasn't good enough, sorry that she didn't stop him when he hurt me. I held her in my hands and I told her that she was more than good enough. That she was the best mother that I could ever wish for. And I wanted to go on, to tell her that she never let my father touch me, that she never let him come near me when he was in a rage, even if that meant she would get hurt instead. That she worked tirelessly to support not only herself, not just me, but 2 children. That she loved us both. But I didn't know what would happen if I reminded her of everything. Of the way she would hold Bethany's cheeks, look into her eyes, and call her a precious emerald. So I just told her that the past was far behind us, and that whatever terrible things had happened in our lives, we had survived and we had come so far, and that was what mattered in the end. She passed away last Thursday, peacefully in her sleep. I was there until the end, and I know I'll remember her forever. Story 2, Things Out There. I work at NASA. No, I'm not an astronaut or a rocket scientist. I work in administration, human resources to be precise. You might think that's a boring job. You'd be wrong. My job involves employee transition. That means I go in and clean out the offices and cubicles of persons who have quit or been fired. I have to remove the personal effects of the recently departed before their co-workers can come in and look through any job-related stuff they might need to keep. Let me tell you, it can get interesting. You learn a lot about people from their personal effects. Most of the time it's mundane stuff. I've found enough pills and booze to throw a big party. People leave behind love letters, arrest reports, notices from banks, inscribed Zippos, signed pictures. 3 people left behind personal letters from different presidents, and 1 a Christmas card from a Soviet premier. I tend to return their personal effects and papers when I can. This can get a bit comical. One time I had to collect the property of an office friend, an extremely prim and proper young woman in public relations who had been let go in a reorganization. Under her desk I found a small gym bag containing a set of leather restraints and a most unusual outfit in her size made of purple latex. I mailed it back to her with a note saying, "Oops." I ran into her at a social event some months later. She turned purple herself when she saw me. Then there was the time I had to clean out the desk of an elderly scientist who had been with us since the place was founded. A framed picture hung on the wall of him with von Braun and several other smiling guys at White Sands. There was another, smaller frame in his desk drawer, under some papers, with a picture of him in a Kriegsmarine uniform receiving the Iron Cross from Adolf Hitler. Next to it was a ceremonial dagger with a swastika on its pommel and New Schwabenland 1943 inscribed on the blade. I boxed it all up, along with some yellowing paperwork in German, and sent it to our special projects group. Let them deal with it. You never know what you'll find. I try not to dwell on it, and I certainly don't discuss it with anyone outside my little part of HR. I like my job and I want to keep doing it. So as you might imagine, it took a lot of soul searching for me to tell the story of a forgotten old man, and of what I found in that old building near an abandoned launch pad. The employee in question, Peter Lane, had died in a workplace mishap. Long story short, he slipped and fell in the cafeteria, cracked his head against a table, then the floor. Never woke up. He lingered in the hospital for a few days before expiring. Poor guy had no one, not friends, family or even co-workers. Seems he was the last by a long shot of a group that had been mothballed decades ago, a ghost from NASA's early days, haunting his office in a suit that was fashionable when Gemini was in orbit. I went over to his office the day after we got word of his death. First, I had to dig out his employee records. That took a while. I had to send over to the archives for them, and at first even they couldn't find them. Payroll was the key. I decided not to wait for the courier to bring the packet. I wanted to get the office sweep over with first. The building was on the far side of the Space Center, so I drove my own car over with the intent of nipping out for some shopping during my lunch break. 2 security guards were waiting for me. One commented to the other as I approached, "And here she is, the angel of death, right on time." Then they both smiled at me. My job, combined with my thin build and a penchant for wearing black, had earned me that nickname. I took it in stride. "Hello, Harry." "Hi, Gary." "Got something for me?" Harry nodded and handed me a large Ziploc bag. "Yes, Mom. Personal effects of Mr. Lane. Just arrived from the hospital. Keys, his ID, wallet, few other things. Got a list and receipt for you to sign." Of course. We did the usual paperwork dance and soon they were driving off, leaving me alone in front of the place. I took a long look. It was definitely a building of its time. I could imagine it when it was gleaming new, with men in suits and women in long dresses dashing in from a parking lot filled with giant cars sporting giant tail fins. Now, its weathered facade and touches of rust made it look tired, abandoned. I wondered if the big shots would tear it down and throw up some faceless glass box in its place. They were good at erasing the past around this place. I fished out the keys and eventually found the one that opened the glass double doors into the empty lobby. Thankfully, the air conditioning was still on and the place hadn't become a hothouse from the Florida heat. A single corridor extended straight from the lobby down the center of the building with a dozen or so office doors on either side, while a suspended staircase wound up from the lobby to the second floor. Empty buildings always give me a shiver. They just feel wrong to me. Abandoned, lifeless. This was the first time in the 4 years I'd been at NASA that I'd been anywhere that had, and would have, no people. It was an active place, and there was always a buzz about it. This building was quiet as a tomb. I took a deep breath, shook it off. "Do your job, Inga," I told myself, and got to work. The glass-framed board by the reception desk listing the building's occupants in white press in letters told me my destination was here on the first floor. I walked down the corridor past endless pairs of open doors to either side showing empty offices. Each had the same furniture, mirror images of one another. Metal desks and wooden roller chairs, enameled staplers and bakelite telephones. The place was a movie set from some drama on the space race, waiting for its cast and crew. My destination was the last office on the right. I would have known even if I had not looked up the number. It was the only one with its door closed. It was also locked, so I spent another minute guessing the right key. 2 keys, that is, because there was an extra lock, a deadbolt, as well as the usual in-knob lock. Both turned with well-used ease and I entered the office of Peter Lane. I didn't know what I was expecting. Dust and cobwebs, perhaps? Stacks of newspapers to the ceiling? Maybe a secret stash of NASA memorabilia. I'd found a moon rock once, and plenty of mementos from programs ranging from Skylab to the Space Shuttle. None of that prepared me for what I found. The office was a larger one meant for management, maybe even a director. There were the larger models of desk and chair, guest chairs, a meeting table. There was a chalkboard on the wall next to the table and an overhead projector on a wheeled stand. All was vintage, and everything was in perfect condition. The office itself was clean as a whistle. Spotless. Even more, it was precise. The precision of the place was amazing. Everything in exactly the place it seemed to belong. I felt like I had stepped back in time to the moment before its occupant had taken up residence and ruined its showroom perfection. But then, I saw signs of Dr. Lane. Yes, Doctor, as his diploma from Caltech was hanging on the wall. He was a physicist. No surprise there, this was NASA after all. Near it was a picture from some kind of conference. Persons sitting around an oval table in a state of staged informality. The only person I recognized in the black and white photo was President Eisenhower. A small library of hardcover books stood behind his desk on a thin credenza, held upright by bookends styled as chromed sci-fi rockets. I perused the titles. It was a surprise. Instead of the expected science textbooks, there were titles such as The Golden Bough, Passport to Magonia, and Operation Trojan Horse. One well-thumbed book was titled Psychic Discoveries in the Soviet Union. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. Either Dr. Lane was really bored or he had a taste for the weird. My curiosity was piqued. I turned my attention to the main focus of my mission, Lane's desk. I sat in the desk chair and marveled at its sturdiness and comfort. It was one of those rare moments when I thought about absconding with an office find. But, business first. I looked at the top of the desk. Nothing there. As with the rest of the office, the desktop was uncluttered, its few occupants arranged around the central blotter. The only personalized item was an expensive-looking fountain pen embossed with the NASA logo. That was a surprise. NASA replaced NASA in 1958. Dr. Lane may have been here since day one. How old was he? I turned my attention to the desk drawers. The surprises kept coming. I opened the upper left drawer and found its sole occupant was a M1911 semi-automatic pistol in a leather holster. I left it where it was and closed the drawer. Why did a scientist in an empty building need a weapon? I let that question hang and moved on. The upper right drawer was empty, as was the larger lower right drawer. It was the lower left drawer that held the prize, if you want to call it that. Inside was a storage box whose only marking was a short strip of masking tape on its lid, upon which someone had written, X16. I lifted the box out of its drawer and set it on the desktop. There was nothing about the box to set it apart, no markings or writing other than that bit of tape at the top. I lifted off the lid and peered inside. Now the mystery deepened, for the box was largely empty but for a manila folder and a single reel-to-reel tape. I fished out the folder. The top sheet inside was a memo on the old NASA letterhead. May 1, 1961. Subject, X16 Aftermath. Confidential. Dr. Lane. The Council has concluded that the events of April 30 and the loss of both the X-16 vehicle and its pilot, Major Howards, constitute a national security event without a resolution in the foreseeable future. We therefore order the cancellation of the X-16 program. The remaining X-16 airframe will be removed to a secure location. All records connected to the program are to be destroyed immediately. All personnel are to be reassigned after being reminded of their obligations to secrecy under the National Security Act. The Office of the Administrator will be contacting you with additional instructions. This action is not to be seen as a reflection on yourself, or any member of your team. NASA values your contributions and looks forward to your continuing presence in the program. Sincerely, James E. Webb. I sat down in disbelief. What had I read? This was nothing less than evidence of a project that had been erased from NASA history. I knew that history. I'd read a dozen books, seen all the TV programs, been through the museum. I'd even taken the tour a few times. Never had I seen anything about anything called X-16. The X-15 had been the last space plane. But here, in the empty office of a forgotten scientist, I'd found evidence of a conspiracy to cover up the failure of an experimental airframe, and the death of its pilot. I suppose I shouldn't have been so surprised. This was during the Cold War. There was a general acceptance of secrecy back then. Fear of a Soviet nuclear attack made people nervous. It was easy to convince everyone to keep quiet about or ignore something if they thought it was in the national interest. You could hide anything that way. Even this. I spent a few minutes looking through the rest of the folder's contents. There was a biography of Major Joseph Howards, USAF. The attached picture showed a smiling man in a silver pressure suit with the NASA logo and an American flag in the background. He had that right stuff look shared by all the first astronauts. His record was impeccable. He'd been a combat ace in Korea, then earned an advanced degree in aeronautics before joining the space program. The final entry was as vague as the rest had been precise, stating only that he'd left NASA in 1961 and his whereabouts were unknown. The rest were technical papers concerning a high-altitude aircraft designated X-16. Lots of jargon and the complex math that gave me eye strain. I set them aside for later. My eyes fell upon the final item, the audio tape. Typical 3M reel, still in its thin little cardboard box. There was a strip of that old-style plastic label across it saying, X16 com feed and a date and some code. I looked at it for a while. Sifting through desks, looking at pictures, that was all in my job description. Listening to this tape would be another matter. One can't claim later to have accidentally spun up a reel and heard the contents. On the sideboard by the window was a reel-to-reel tape recorder, an old Wallensack with a NASA sticker on one end. Like everything else in this office, it looked brand new. Before I knew I was doing it, I had taken the tape reel out of its box and was walking over to the machine. I could always say I'd found the reel in another drawer and had to confirm it was from this project. But, who would I say it to? I'm alone, in an empty building. That irrational fear of the building itself flashed for a moment. For a moment, I felt surrounded by ghosts. Shaking off that silly notion, I finished loading the tape and hit play. I've written out a transcript of what was on the tape. It begins about a minute before the X-16 was dropped from the B-52 that carried it into position. The first 14 minutes of the flight are uneventful. Then, at 14:17, this happens. Howards, I'm seeing some unexpected atmospheric phenomena. Approaching what looks like a patch of cloud. Canaveral, your present altitude puts you above any cloud cover. Can you confirm this is not an optical effect, some kind of atmospheric reflection? Negative. No clouds below me that I can see. Anomaly appears to be at a higher altitude, hard to judge. Maybe 500,000 feet. No distinct features. C-16, maintain present altitude. Observe the anomaly as you pass. Turn on wing cameras. Copy that. 33 seconds pass before the next transmission. Canaveral, visibility is reduced. I think that cloud has reduced in altitude. I seem to be flying through its lower edge. There is a pause of several seconds, then, getting a bit of particulate build-up on the canopy. Might be ice crystals. Copy that, 16. Reduce altitude by 5,000 feet. Roger. Then, strange color to this ice build-up. Kinda pinkish. 11 seconds later. Canaveral, request altitude confirmation. We have you at 423,000 feet. Copy that. Instruments read same. Cloud cover has increased despite altitude change. I think it's getting worse. Visibility outside the cockpit severely compromised. C-16, we read no cloud cover at your position. Reduce altitude by additional 10,000 feet. Copy that. 3 seconds later. C-16, why have you reduced airspeed? It's not me, Canaveral. Engine is at full throttle. I seem to be encountering increased atmospheric drag. Bring her down to 100,000. Let's get a visual on you. 6 seconds later. Canaveral, controls are not responding. Repeat, controls are not responding. Cannot adjust altitude. Airspeed continuing to reduce. Mayday, mayday. I have engine flame out. Flying a dead stick. Abort mission, 16. Eject, eject. Need to lose some altitude first. Airspeed just fell below Mach 1. A strange hissing sound is heard. Visibility nil, airspeed dropping rapidly. A few seconds later, Howards is sounding noticeably alarmed. What the hell is going on, fellas? I should be dropping like a stone, but... eject. Negative, there's something wrong with the canopy. I can't get it to, the hissing sound gets louder. There's a sound of wrenching metal. Canopy off. Ejecting. There's a sort of explosive sound, probably the ejection seat activating. Audio quality becomes greatly reduced. I'm barely out. Damn cloud is so thick, like ejecting into mud. I can see the airframe, it's disintegrating, like an acid. The cloud. There are things out there. Oh, God, help me. C. 16, respond. Joe, what's going on up there? Joe? 10 seconds later the rangemaster comes on to announce they have lost contact with the pilot and can no longer see the airplane on radar. A cloud passed over the sun, darkening the office as I sat there, unable to move, watching the take-up reel on the Wallensack spin endlessly. What had I just heard? Major Howards was dead. His aircraft was destroyed, by a cloud? A pink cloud full of crystals, one that could stop a hypersonic aircraft in mid-flight, and hold it in place while what? I took a sharp breath when I realized I hadn't been breathing. I rewound the tape, then put the memo and the tape reel back in the box and replaced the lid. What was I going to do? I couldn't simply turn this into security. It could ignite a scandal. A scandal that I was now involved in. And I couldn't leave it in Lane's office to be found by others. I didn't know what to do, so I did something irrational, something illegal, something I've never done before. I kept it. I put the box and the Wallensack in the trunk of my car. Then I went back in and collected Dr. Lane's books and photos. I went back to my office and dropped off the box of photos and books along with the bag of his personal effects. Once I was there I realized I'd left the gun in his desk, so I drove back to the building. But I kept driving when I saw the grey sedan parked right in front. Someone was in the building, and I bet I knew where. The need to get out of Canaveral grew strong in my gut. I swung around and headed for the back gate, the one I used when taking long lunches. It took me close to that abandoned launch pad, where for a moment I swore I saw a man in a silver flight suit watching me, resplendent against a sky darkening with clouds that had a strange, pinkish hue. Story 3, the corpses of Lake Ozark, Missouri are rarely recovered. I believe I know why. On average, 16 people drown each year in the Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri. The majority of the deceased are rarely recovered. The local authorities blame underwater currents, lack of water clarity, and wildlife for the inability to retrieve the corpses. However, what I experienced last winter has led me to believe something much more sinister is responsible. Last year, my parents purchased a new construction condominium at the Lake of the Ozarks, and were the only residents at the time, as the other units were still being built and sold. The condo was only an hour and a half from my campus and was a perfect place to study for finals. It was paradise compared to my rundown college home. It had a king-size bed, full kitchen, clean bathrooms, and most importantly, it was quiet. It was early December of last year. I had just finished packing up my car with dirty clothes and books, excited to have a weekend of peace and quiet before the last few days of final exams. Usually one or two of my housemates would come with me, but they had already finished up for the semester and decided to spend the last few days partying before they had to head home for the holidays. This was a perfect excuse for me to retreat to the quiet condo. The throaty exhaust of my old Mustang roared to life on the first turn of my key, and I smiled. I was way too excited for my getaway. It was getting late as I hit the highway towards the lake. After an hour or so I pulled off, hit the back roads and decided put the pedal down. I cracked the windows and the cold December air whistled past as I chased the sunlight. If I knew what was in store for me that weekend, I would have turned around, floored it back to campus. About 10 minutes later I saw the dim, aqua-colored glow of the Blue Shore condominium's sign cutting through the darkness. I shifted gears and pulled down the steep hilly entrance, my headlamps the only source of light for miles. Just as I expected, the condominium parking lot was completely empty. I pulled into the front spot and parked. I stepped out of the warmth of my car into the frigid, night air. The two-story complex would eventually have 5 units on each level. My parents' unit, the only occupied one at the time, was at the top corner, with only one neighboring wall. I scaled stairs and walked into my second home, condo number 2-1. I pulled out my phone and used the screen to illuminate the door's keypad and typed in the code, my birth year. My parents were under the assumption that I would forget any other 4-digit combination, and they were probably right. I stepped inside and turned on the lights. The entrance led into the dining room, with the kitchen on the left and living room to the right. At the far end was the master bedroom, which had a large window that provided a beautiful view of the lake. Since I was on the second floor, I could see the black, moonlit water for half a mile. I made a frozen pizza and studied for a couple of hours. It didn't take long for my relaxation to turn to exhaustion. I decided to take a shower and head to bed early, promising myself that I would wake up early and hit the books. I jolted awake in the middle of the night and looked at the bedside clock, 3:18 a.m. The cold wind howled outside as the sound of ice and snow brushed against the siding. I had completely forgotten to check the weather prior to leaving. I rubbed my eyes and slowly made my way to the kitchen for some water. I drank the glass and stood sleepily in the dark. Just as I turned to head back into the room, I heard the last thing I ever expected, the breaking of ice, and the echoing sound of splashing lake water. I walked to the back window that overlooked the lake and stared into the vast darkness. My mind raced until I came to the eventual conclusion that the noise must have been the result of a fallen tree or unlucky deer trying to take a drink. The next morning, curiosity got the best of me. I zipped up my coat and stepped outside, pulling the door shut and hitting the lock button at the center of the keypad. I walked to the top of the stairs and peered down. There were footprints in the snow. Bipedal prints. They led from the edge of the lake, to my car, turned, and disappeared once again at lake shore. It didn't make any sense, and a cold chill ran down my spine. I carefully walked down the stairs. The air was thin and quiet, the only noise came from the crunching of my boots in snow. I had the overwhelming sensation of being watched as I made my way to the dock, turning and looking over my shoulder every few seconds. I cursed as I held my phone in the air, desperate for a signal. I had to tell someone, anyone. After what seemed like an eternity, one bar appeared. I dialed 911 as quickly as I could and held the phone to my face. It was no use, it was too weak. I had been gone for over an hour and decided to head back inside. It was considerably warmer now, and the snow on the asphalt had already begun to melt. I kept thinking to myself, had someone really jumped into the water last night? I did nothing but stare at the lake from the window and drink. I was too paranoid, and my mind raced for an explanation. Before I knew it, it was already midnight and the alcohol had made me drowsy. I don't remember falling asleep. 3:09 a.m. I awoke to the unmistakable, horrendous sound of scraping against the metal of the front door. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, the only thing I could use as a weapon. I raced back to the door and leaned against it. My heart was beating through my chest. After a moment, I worked up the courage to look through the peephole. To my relief, I saw only the vacant space of the doorway. I sat back down on the cold, hard tile with my back against door and knife clenched tightly in my hand. I stayed that way until the dim, morning light spilled through the windows. I got back up and checked the peephole. Everything seemed clear. I slowly unlocked the bolt and opened the door. I discovered what I feared the most, the footprints led straight to the door, which was now covered in deep, long scratches that ran its entire length. With my rear-wheel drive car and a snow-covered hill as the only exit, I knew that I was stuck for the time being. I had to do something or tell someone. The door was my lifeline, my shield. I stayed in the condo most of the day, pacing around with my cell phone in an attempt to find a signal, too frightened to go outside, and cursing my parents for not yet installing internet. Eventually I worked up enough courage. I knew I could potentially get a signal at the end of the dock. It had worked in the past. As I made my way to the dock, I followed the footsteps that once again led to the lake shore. I got closer and examined them. They were unmistakably human, and despite the cold, reeked of lake water and rot. I stood at the edge of the dock with my phone, unable to receive a signal. I decided to head back and barricade myself inside before dark. Just as I left the dock, I heard the faint sound of something large swimming just below the icy surface. That evening I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the door waiting for something to happen. The hours flew by and my eyes grew heavy. Before I knew it, I fell asleep with my head on the table. 3:02 a.m. The sound of pounding and splintering wood woke me up. I looked in horror as I quickly discovered what was happening. The door was being rammed. Adrenaline shot me up in the darkness. I didn't have much time. I ran to a closet and quietly closed it just as the front door burst open. I covered my mouth, and my eyes filled with tears as I stared through the crack in the closet door. Something walked inside. It was too dark to make out any of the features. It walked with staggered, unnatural movements. The room instantly filled with the smell of putrid, decaying flesh as it took heavy, wet steps on the tile floor. As the figure moved deeper inside, towards the back of the condo, I made a break for it and ran out, jumping over to be the front door. I fumbled my keys and jumped in my car. The engine clicked as it refused to turn over. My eyes filled with tears as I worked the clutch and accelerator. On the third attempt, the engine finally turned over and roared to life. As I tore up the hill towards the main road, I checked the rear view mirror. The dark, massive figure stood a few feet from the building. I had barely made it. I will never forget the inhuman scream it let out as I drove off. I reached cell service and through rambling hysteria, eventually informed my parents of all I had witnessed. My father contacted the local authorities, and was told to not return to the condo until the police had investigated. We never returned. The building owner contacted my father a few days later with some bogus story about unexpected foundation issues, and claimed that the entire project was to be demolished. He wrote my father a check for 3 times the value of the condo for our inconvenience. After what I experienced, I have drawn 2 possible conclusions. The first is that something otherworldly is responsible for the deaths and missing bodies. Or, those who are lost in the lake are far from dead. Story 4, one of the names in the graveyard doesn't belong there. I go once a week. I used to go every day, but people told me it wasn't healthy. People understand grief for about 6 months or maybe a year, but after that they just expect you to move on. The only benefit is people start to avoid talking to you at social events. They don't want you to kill their buzz. Honestly, the kind of people who avoid you are the kind of people who would bore you to tears anyway, talking about house prices or a new Volkswagen they just bought. Sarah was never one to suffer people like that. Fools and dull conversationalists got shut down quickly. Maybe it was the Slav in her, but I always admired it. I'd get stuck talking to some boring cunt for hours. I buried her here in Dublin. She didn't really have any family back in Poland to send her to, so I bought a plot in Mount Jerome Cemetery. It's a sea of graves just outside the centre of Dublin in a place called Harold's Cross. It was steadily raining, but I had a decent coat, so I wasn't bothered. I talked to her about my week and told her a dirty joke someone at work had told me. She always liked jokes, so whenever I heard a new one I told it to her. Then I told her I missed her every day. I didn't break down crying, which is progress, I suppose. It was dark. It was time for me to go. The gates were probably already locked. The caretaker took pity on me and let me stay a little later than everyone else. I could just climb the trellis near the exit to get out. I walked toward the exit. The rain began to intensify. It quickly became a torrent. I could barely see a few feet in front of my eyes. I took shelter under a massive oak tree. Sheltered there, I looked out at the wall of rain. The tree canopy was thick and big enough to cover about a 10-meter radius. A few gravestones were also lucky enough to be sheltered under it. They looked old. The graveyard went back a long time, so they might have been there for a few hundred years. I bent down to look at one. It was covered in a thick moss, but the inscription was legible. Mary McCarthy. Always kept a tidy home. Beloved mother, daughter, sister, aunt, and child murderer. Born the 21st of September 1970. Died the 14th of March 2020. What the fuck, who puts shit like that on a headstone, and why was the date in the future? I was a little spooked but decided to read the other 2. Seamus Doyle. Served his community and country faithfully for 21 years. Beloved father, son, brother, uncle, and violent rapist. Born the 8th of February 1976. Died the 24th of December 2018. The last headstone read. Billy O'Connell. He saw something he shouldn't have. Beloved son and brother. Born the 18th of July 2007. Died the 31st of October 2018. I didn't recognize the woman or the boy's names, but Seamus Doyle was a politician, crooked as a country lane, always accused of taking brown envelopes, but he never got anything pinned on him that stuck. Every election his inbred constituents re-elected him because he fixed a few roads and showed up at every hurling game. Who the hell would make a gravestone for him? Sadly he's alive and well. I saw him on a current affairs show the other night bitching about how gay marriage was destroying the Christian fabric of Ireland. Was the headstone some kind of publicity stunt, claiming he's a rapist was gonna end someone up in court for libel? Lovely weather, we're having, a gravelly voice spoke a few feet away. I nearly jumped with fright, I was so engrossed in looking at the headstones. Jesus Christ, you scared the shit out of me. I spat at the kindly-looking old man who was sheltering under the canopy with me. I am truly sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. You must not have heard me with the sound of the rain. He had a warm face and seemed genuinely apologetic about startling me. I took a moment to compose myself. The man was old, maybe 70, and wearing a large overcoat. The chain of a pocket watch hung outside his front coat pocket. He was fairly dapper for an old man. Sorry, I didn't mean to snap at you. I was just a little freaked out with these headstones. You seen these? They're pretty unusual. I pointed to the headstones. He didn't pay much attention. Your wife, how did she die? I hope you don't mind me asking. It's just, sometimes I see you up at her grave while I am here visiting. His voice was warm and he seemed genuinely interested. When people nose into my business I normally tell them to fuck off, but he seemed kind and a little sad, like he had lost someone recently. Car accident about 2 years ago. I told him as we sheltered under the thick warm canopy of the oak tree. Her own fault or someone else's? He inquired. Someone else's. She was coming home from work late at night. She was taken clean of the road by another car. I informed him. I'm sorry for your loss. He consoled me with great empathy. He seemed to genuinely mean it. I had been distracted by his questions, but I was refocused again. Have you read these gravestones? They don't make any sense. I asked him. I thought he might know why someone had put them there. Most people don't pay much attention to those. In fact, most people don't seem to notice them at all. He informed me. The other driver, did they die in the accident? He inquired. I was confused by all his questions. Why did he seem so unconcerned by the gravestones? No, it was a hit and run. The other car left the scene. They never found M. These dates on the gravestones, they're in the future. Have you actually looked at them? My words were all flowing together, telling him about Sarah and asking about the graves. That's a terrible tragedy. God isn't always fair, I suppose, he said almost absent-mindedly. Look, it's been nice talking to you, but I have to go. With that I took out my phone and took a few pictures of the graves. I wasn't going to get any information out of the old man. I thought he must have been a touch senile. Maybe the groundskeeper would know. I could call him the next morning. I pulled up the collar on my coat and walked out from under the shelter of the oak tree into the rain. As I did, the man's voice spoke again. You're not going to interfere, are you? He asked sternly. I walked back under the tree canopy. What? I asked him in a confused tone. Those names. You're not to interfere, they're marked, they all belong here. His voice was no longer warm and kind, his face no longer friendly. What? An 11-year-old kid deserves to be in a grave. I spat at him. He belongs here. You don't need to know why, but you are not to interfere. Do you understand? Those names belong here. He was aggressive now, venom in his voice as he spoke. I squared up to him, pointing at him with my finger. Look, you old cunt, I don't know what weird shit you're doing in this graveyard, but my wife is buried here, so if I see you hanging around here again, I'm gonna knock out any real teeth you have left in your senile head. With that I walked away into the rain. Again he called after me. Another grave could be added, with another name. He said. He clearly didn't know when to shut the fuck up. I pounded back toward him with my fists clenched. Simon Castles, he finished. I stopped dead in my tracks. my body frozen with fear, he stared at me with cold dead eyes. "That's the name you gave him, right, Simon Castles? You didn't have a real name for who killed your wife, so you gave him a name. It made him seem more real, like in the noir films where a cop never finds his father's killer? Or a man who can't remember who attacked his wife?" I had never told anyone the name Simon Castles. It was just a name I gave him in my head, something to focus all my hatred and bile on. In truth, I didn't even know if Castles was a man or a woman. It could have been anyone. A fourth grave could be added, for Simon Castles. Most people can't see the graves, and I'm sorry that you did, but I need you to forget about the names and the graves, and I swear to you Simon Castles won't see the new year. It's what Sarah would have wanted. He was clear and concise, his tone menacing. It was a promise and threat. "Fuck you, you didn't know her and you don't know me." I fired the words at him with spite and walked away into the rain. "I know you better than you think. Don't try to be a hero, don't try to save the boy. His card is marked, you'll only cause more suffering." He screamed after me in a violent rage, all composure in his voice lost. I began to run through the mud and pelting rain to the front gates. It felt like an eternity before I reached them. I couldn't be certain he wasn't following me. I reached the trellised wall and climbed up it like I was 15 years younger. I vaulted over the top and made a sprint for my car. I opened the door and stuck the key in the ignition. The engine took a few seconds but eventually roared to life. I turned on the headlights, put the car in first gear and sprayed a hail of gravel behind me as I took off down the road. I didn't slow down till I got home. The adrenaline kept me going through the drive, but it was now wearing off. My heart and mind were racing and I had a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. I took out my phone to look at the pictures of the graves I took. I swiped through the images of the graves, the names clearly etched in stone, but there was one more photo than there should have been. The final picture was of an ancient-looking gravestone with the name Simon Castles engraved on it along with the following words: "All you need do, is do nothing." Story 5, Scabma. I live in the north. I say it like that for two reasons: 1, because it sounds cool, like I'm a character in Game of Thrones, and 2, because this story, were I to give even just the country, would encourage people to go to dangerous places. You know the type of people. Maybe you are one of those people. So I live in the northern hemisphere, inside the Arctic Circle. If you live in a place where human beings are actually meant to live, there are some things you might not know about living this far up north. Or, rather, you might know about them the same way you know gravity on the moon is about 1/7 of Earth's gravity, but you don't know it like an astronaut who's actually jumped up on the moon does. One of those things is that for half the year, it gets dark. A polar night. The English word doesn't really capture what it actually is. Scabma. Scabma is the word in Northern Sami. Maybe it's just because I don't speak Sami, and thus it sounds cool and mysterious to me, but the word speaks the definition of a polar night to me much better than the English term. Scabma. Now, polar night here doesn't last for half a year, though the amount of sunlight for the rest of winter is still lower than anybody would like. It lasts for about 3 weeks. People go insane in the depths of polar night. Out where it lasts for months, men murder their families in the snow, drink themselves to death in a lonely cabin, wander out into the woods, never to be seen again. Even completely sane people get a very decent dose of SAD, one of the best acronyms in the world, spending a few weeks without sun in the middle of the forest. By the way, that's another thing about the North people don't know: the forest in winter. I'll try to give you a description of my childhood home. It's a modern, 4-bedroom house near a lake. My room overlooked the driveway, which leads to a gravel road. The gravel road runs up the east side of the house, and the lake is in the northwest. The road leads to a city center, which is just a liquor store, hardware store, a small congregation house which is like a church, but not an actual church, and a supermarket. There are other houses around the lake, as well, the closest being maybe 300 meters away, and the farthest, maybe 5 kilometers, close enough for a child to bike there, but not close enough to walk. For American readers, 3 feet equals approx 1 meter, and a mile is 1,6 kilometers, and all the rest, apart from the yards of the houses, a small beach cleared on the lake shore, and the road, is the forest. It's beautiful, of course. When the snows come. Before the snows, it's dark, damp, full of a permeating smell that gets everywhere. The trees crouch around you and you can hear so many damp cracks and creaks, and it goes on until you want to scream and run. But when the snows come, the evergreens get a seasonal decoration better than anything you can buy in a store, a pure white coat of fluffy snow. Go souther, and the snows keep melting off and turning glossy and ugly, but here in the north, when the snow comes, it comes to stay. The snow is really the only redeeming factor in living here in the winter. Snow, apart from being pretty, reflects light, you see. As soon as the first snow hits, you feel like it's a proper sunrise again. It also dampens sounds, so all the creepy forest sounds stop being so bothersome. And thankfully the snows always come before Scabma starts. Except when they don't. It's happened 4 times in my life. 2 times I'm not old enough to remember. The 3rd time, I was 6. We had 3 days of polar night without snow. On the first night, a large group of people walked on the gravel road going past our house, carrying torches, lanterns and candles. My sister got excited and wanted to join in, but our mother said we didn't have any candles, and besides, we weren't even invited to the event. Would we want to ruin their planning? She said it very casually. So, me and my sister watched from the window. It took almost an hour for the entire group to pass. We didn't notice anything suspicious that night, and our parents didn't give us any reason to worry. When the snows came, we each talked to our friends about it, and they had seen the group too, but none had been allowed to participate. This still didn't raise our suspicions. Maybe kids just weren't allowed. It was only much later on, when I got the chance to see a huge Independence Day parade and one announcer mentioned that over 2,000 people had participated, that it struck me, we live in a municipality of 2,000 people. The group was at least as large as the Independence Day parade. Where did they all come from? On the second night, or day, there was no difference. Our family had come to an unspoken decision: nobody would go outside. Nobody would say why. Even when my father mentioned that he'd like some beers for the evening, he just stopped himself with an "ah." Well, after dinner, I spent the rest of the day looking out of the window at myself. Since it was so dark outside, all I could see was my own face, reflected. I looked for hours on end. I made silly faces. I don't know why I spent so long looking at it. Maybe well, the point is, I was doing my movie star wink and smile for the millionth time, winked with my left eye, and the reflection also winked with its left eye. It took me a second to realize something was wrong, and it took it a second as well. But as soon as I did, the thing outside the window locked its eye on me, and started walking backwards, face still frozen in a wink and a smile. All I remember doing is breathing. Breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out until the window pane in front of me was fogged over. The next thing I remember is wiping off the glass, looking at my perfectly ordinary reflection underneath the light coating of moisture, and then going to sleep. The next day, I spent all day under the covers. We did not have dinner. Then, thankfully, the next morning it had snowed. Because we were kids, we forgot about the 3 days quickly and focused on playing with other kids, enjoying our winter break, and of course, Christmas. The whole thing seemed more like a bad dream than anything, and since it didn't happen again for many, many years, frankly, I forgot about it. The 4th, and thus far final time I've experienced it lasted only for a day. It was 2 years ago, and it was one of the sorriest winters we've had. The snows kept melting, and that usually never happens this far out. As I said, when the snows come, they come to stay. But not this year. The day before Scabma started, there was already a strong coat of snow. Still, I couldn't shake a feeling somewhere in the back of my head. I called up my mother and asked if she wouldn't mind putting me up for the night in the old house. I felt a little silly, but less so when she somberly replied yes, I think that's for the best. When I got there, my sister had already arrived. We didn't talk a lot. Again, we all knew why we had gathered together, but nobody dared say it out loud, lest it become more real than it was. The next morning, we awoke to no sun, and no snow. It had melted in the night or early morning. Only a few sad, glossy piles remained where Father had shoveled snow out of their driveway. The people bearing lights did not come this time. What did come was total silence. We tried playing music, but every time we put something on or made any sort of loud sound, it just felt wrong. So we huddled in the living room and played board games. If we talked in whispers. We got sleepy, eventually. Mother and Father made us all beds in the living room, but I, feeling like an adult, insisted on going up to the second floor, to my old room. I laid on the bed, underneath a window across which I had securely drawn the curtains, and browsed my phone, trying to look for any quiet distraction. And then it started, tap 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 pause tap scratch tap tap. A quiet, rhythmic tapping on my window. I froze. At first, I drew the covers up to my chin like a child, looking intently at the curtains while the tapping continued. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. Against my better judgment, I opened the curtains to peek out. I saw exactly what I had expected. I closed the curtains as the tapping continued, and went to the living room, both happy and very unhappy. Happy that I did not actually understand Morse code, but very unhappy that I knew enough to recognize it when I heard it. I did not want to know what it wanted to say to me. I slept fitfully. I couldn't get out of my head the image of my own face, frozen in an inhuman wink and smile. The next morning, the snows came. Unease came over all of us. We put music on and made pancakes for breakfast. Somehow we knew the snows had come to stay, now. I went out with my father to shovel the driveway. As we were shoveling, I took a long look at my old bedroom window. I don't know what I was looking for. Footprints, maybe. My father caught me staring. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with a strangely constrained expression, then clapped me on the shoulder and grunted. Then he turned his eyes to the ground and the shovel, and we worked in silence. In the afternoon, I left. The following year, I moved to the south, ostensibly because of better job opportunities. The snows weren't late last year. I visited my parents around Christmas. We didn't talk of Scabma. This year, it feels like it'll be late again. Story 6, my aunt bought a McMansion. It started with one of those dumb precious moments figurines. I was at a resale shop with my friend Aubrey when I saw it. A cutesy statue, a girl with a bow on top of her balloon-sized head, her disproportionately gigantic eyes fixed on a tiny dog. And there was a familiar diamond-shaped chip on the girl's shoulder. I stared at it for a moment, long-forgotten memories rushing back, remembering how I'd felt when I knocked the collectible off my Aunt Matilda's shelf, a mixture of fear and relief that the thing hadn't completely shattered. I was holding the figurine in my hand when Aubrey strolled up. "Don't tell me you're going to start collecting those," she said, wrinkling her nose. "Or should we get you a moo-moo to go with it?" It took me a moment to answer. "It's my aunt's. She loved these things. I don't know why she would sell it." Aubrey smirked. "Maybe she got some taste." Frowning and ignoring Aubrey, I put the figurine back on the shelf, and made a mental note to call my aunt when I got home. "Hi, you've reached the voicemail of Matilda Carver. Please leave a message." I hung up the phone in frustration. I'd called a dozen times to no avail. It wasn't like Aunt Matilda not to return calls. She loved gabbing on the phone, even more so since she'd moved an hour away from us, her only family. When a week went by and neither my mom nor I could get Aunt Mattie on the phone, and her local, molasses slow police department remained unruffled by our calls, I decided I was going to drive down and check on her. Mom used her friend Finder app to verify that Aunt Mattie was at her house, and I hit the road. The hour passed easily, and before long, I was pulling into her driveway. About a year and a half ago, she'd bought a giant house, one of those overwhelmingly large and haphazardly designed homes in a recently built neighborhood. Think AstroTurf, blue-white sidewalks not yet stained by the elements, and the eerie absence of trees. My grandparents were poor, so as an adult, Aunt Mattie had used her professional success to treat herself to some of the finer things in life. Her house lay on a large tract of land at the end of Rochester Lane. Next to it was an empty field, half bulldozed to make way for more homes. The late afternoon sun hung in slanted lines across the concrete and dirt. There was no car in the driveway, and all the blinds were closed. I got out and walked to the front door, trepidation creeping down my neck. Morbid thoughts of what grisly scene lay inside bloomed in my mind. I'd half hoped I'd find Aunt Mattie cheerily attending to plants in the front yard. Now, I was afraid I'd smell the stench of a corpse or find the detritus of some hard drug binge. I let myself into the dark foyer, bracing myself to see a body sprawled at the bottom of the stairs, neck twisted at an unnatural angle. There was nothing. I deactivated the alarm using the app using her security company's app and the code she'd given me. It was cool and dark and smelled very faintly of pet odors and bleach. I heard jingling in the distance. Max. I called out. The jingling grew closer, until the familiar black-grey snout of her Labrador came zooming out of the kitchen. A few happy yelps and licks later, Max and I explored the house. Aunt Mattie was gone. Her bed was made, clothes hung neatly in the closets, refrigerator only stocked with eggs. Her car was in the garage, the keys in a bowl on the kitchen counter. Things looked normal, and yet they didn't. For one, all her precious moments collectibles were gone from the house. The last time I'd visited, they were all on display in her glass cabinet in the living room. An unfamiliar china set was there instead. Her desktop computer, the one she needed for her job, was gone from its place at her desk, replaced with a cream-colored journal and a silver fountain pen. Aunt Mattie had the sloppiest handwriting, and often proclaimed her love for computers whenever she needed to write something, even grocery lists. The nude still lifes that peppered her walls had been taken down and replaced with the generic, abstract kind of art you'd see at a dentist's office. If it wasn't for Max, I'd have thought she'd moved. I called Aunt Mattie's number again, feeling unsettled. Hi, Aunt Matilda. I'm at your house now, with Max. Will you please call me, please? I'm worried about you. I hung up the phone, and the quiet of the house caused the strangeness of my situation to sink in. Unsure of what to do next, I went and grabbed my stuff from the car. I opened a soda and sat on the couch, unhappily looking around the quiet house. I was in the middle of texting my mom an update when I heard the front door open. I dropped my phone and ran into the foyer. Max bolted ahead of me. I called out, Aunt Mattie? It wasn't her. It was a short lady I didn't recognize. She was roughly in her 60s, her greyish-white hair coiffed in the short crop sported by so many older women. When she saw me, a confused smile spread across her face. Hello, dear, she said. I'm Alice, Matilda's neighbor. Do you know where she is? The question had already tumbled out of my mouth before I realized I hadn't introduced myself, but I kept going anyway. She won't answer me or my mom's calls. Oh, she's on a trip. Left just this morning, actually, said she needed to clear her head about a few things. She asked me to take care of Max while she was gone. A milk-bone treat appeared out of her gardening apron, and she waggled it at Max, but he stayed at my side. Vacation? Where? She didn't say, hun. She was upset, though I don't know about what. Just said she needed to get away and she'd check in every now and then. You've talked to her? Yes, just an hour or two ago, in fact. She waved the treat at Max once again, but he remained unimpressed, his ears flat against his head, his normally swishing tail still. There was an awkward pause. I struggled to deduce what could have happened, that my aunt would apparently call a neighbor, but not respond to me or my mother. This was the woman who Snapchatted me 20 times a day on her trip to Cabo San Lucas. Well, I suppose I'll leave you be. Let me know when you go, so I can make sure the dog gets fed. If you want some company, come by. I'm sure everyone would love to hear from the famous Casey. She talks about you all the time. I stretched my face into a smile that didn't reach my eyes and shook Alice's hand stiffly. nice to meet you." The door shut behind her, and I was alone once again. I decided to take Max on a walk to clear my head. I quickly realized there wasn't much to see. All of the houses were the exact same brown brick with grey stone, turrets and boxes, and 3-car garages stuck together randomly, like a toddler playing with Tinker toys. I sighed. My angry, judgmental thoughts had nothing to do with these houses. My worry sat in my stomach like an anchor. As I walked and tried to calm down, I noticed a lot of the houses had decorative cornucopias on the front stoop. At the entrance to the neighborhood, there was a similar display with some smaller, human-shaped figures, centered neatly in a concrete island filled with acrid-smelling mulch. I could tell Max needed to go, so I urged him over to this no-man's land. Max had just started squatting when I heard a scream. I looked up to see a man and woman running towards me. Befuddled, I looked around. "Stop him!" the woman shrieked. "Get away from it!" Max whimpered and retreated behind me. I waved the doggy bags like a white flag. I'm sorry, okay? I'll pick it up." I picked up Max's turds and hurried away, not in the mood to meet any more neighbors just yet. Glancing back, I saw the man and woman standing reverently in front of the cornucopia display, murmuring. They both made gestures at it with their right hands. I was grateful to re-enter the gloomy silence of Aunt Matilda's house. I reheated some leftovers, and as I sat moodily in the empty room, I gave in and called the police. The dispatcher got an officer on the phone, who told me, in a kind, but unworried tone, that they could come take a statement, but there wasn't much they could do at the moment. It wasn't illegal or strange for a person to rearrange their house, sell some old belongings, or go on vacation alone. They recommended we simply wait a little longer, and ask Alice to pass along any messages in the event my aunt called again. Before the call ended, the cop encouraged me to try Miss Alice's peanut butter cookies. I hung up, feeling more confused than ever. They were right, none of this was illegal, but they didn't know Aunt Mattie. She'd wanted a big house to herself, but she'd wanted to make it her own. When she'd first moved in, she told me she wanted to be the weirdo on the block. She'd never changed herself for the sake of others, but now it seemed like she'd traded the unapologetic person that she was for the same beige mediocrity that surrounded her. And I won't lie, it hurt to think that she might simply not want to talk to family right now. That she was struggling with something, and didn't think we could help. "Aunt Mattie, where are you?" I said aloud, to no one in particular. I stared at the TV for an hour or two, not really watching. It occurred to me I'd never told my mom I'd made it, so I texted her an update, "Arrived a while ago." Neighbors say she went on vacation. Cops still say nothing they can do. Hanging with Max now, will probably come back Sunday. Then I dialed my aunt's number again, this time, just to hear her voice. I almost jumped out of my seat a few minutes later, when the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Alice was standing there, flanked by two strangers and holding a plate of cookies. "We thought we'd be the welcome wagon, since you came down here and all," Alice said. I almost flinched at the saccharine sweetness in her voice. I wasn't in the mood for visitors, but I couldn't come up with an excuse fast enough, so I let them all in. Alice had brought her husband Bill. There was also Vicky, whose blonde bouffant was like a helmet. She introduced herself as a member of the board of directors for the neighborhood's homeowners association. I got the feeling that she brought up that fact a lot. When Bill spoke, I recognized his voice as the cop I talked to earlier. "You sounded like you needed some company," he said. His voice was kind, but I bristled nonetheless. The next hour passed awkwardly, with my discomfort multiplying every second. I felt like I was sitting on a bed of needles as I sat, perched stiffly on Aunt Mattie's couch, a glass of water in my hand, a peanut butter cookie in my hand, at Alice's insistence. At first it was the normal, forced kind of talk, not unlike the life updates I'd give my aunts and uncles at once yearly holiday parties. They asked me questions, while we all sipped water and ate cookies, their politeness almost masking their uncertainty about what to ask. In response, I babbled emotionlessly about my hobbies, my family, my degree, my tentatively plans for the future, no real passion or drive, just the passive, pre-approved scripts that I knew would translate into fractals of equal non-controversy. At first I was just tense the way I always was, in these kinds of probing conversations. But I started to notice odd things from Alice, Bill, and Vicky. For example, once we sat down in the living room, I noticed Vicky staring at me like a hawk. Her blue eyes crawled over my face and body like a searchlight. I crossed my arms without realizing I had. Another time, Bill asked me in a quiet voice if I had any siblings. When I shook my head and said my mom had her hands full, he and Vicky exchanged a pointed glance. Thinking they had some weird, judgmental attitude towards only children, or single mothers, I brushed it off. The final alarm bell was when I saw Vicky was running her hands over the cushions and pillows and upholstery of her place on the couch throughout the conversation. Eventually she stopped, but then she was holding what looked like a dark string, pinching it with one hand and stroking the length of it with her other thumb and forefinger. Struggling to mask my curiosity and suspicion, I snuck a look at it when she went to take a drink of water. It was hair, my hair. It had to be. Alice, Bill, Vicky, Aunt Matilda, they all had light hair, and Max's wasn't that long. I felt oily, sweaty, visibly uncomfortable. I swayed in my seat, struck with a sudden exhaustion. Before I could come up with an excuse to leave the room, Alice suddenly barked, "And do you think you'll want to be a mother, Casey?" I shrank back, intimidated. I don't know, but not for a while, at least. I want to finish school and all, and... I trailed off and smiled, shrugging, trying to mask the unease uncoiling in my belly. The room swam before my eyes. I realized I was still swaying, in soft circles. Drugged. The word flitted across my mind. It was like the first time I'd gotten high, and I'd felt a similar detachment, a fogginess. It had to be. I sucked in gulps of air and fought off the drowsiness. Yelling something about not feeling well, I stumbled to the bathroom next to the kitchen. I had the foresight to make sure the door was locked and the water was running full blast in the sink before I collapsed next to the toilet. Forcing 2 fingers down my throat, I knelt over the bowl until all the gooey, yellowish contents of my stomach had come back up. Outside in the hallway, I heard hushed, low mumbling. The doorknob rattled. I lay down. The cool tile felt soothing against my burning, throbbing skin. If they were going to get in, I couldn't stop them. I was too late and so sleepy. I closed my eyes, and it was only the sensation of Max's rough tongue on my cheek that brought me back. Inch by inch, I rolled over to sitting. There was a sharp pain from under my left buttock, and I realized my phone was in my pocket. I flipped it open and read my one notification, a text from my mom, with bleary eyes. "Honey, it doesn't make sense. Friend Finder says her phone is still in case. I think you should leave. I'm sorry you went out there, but I have a bad feeling. We can figure it out when you get home." I shook with silent laughter at the last line, slumped up against the toilet bowl. I slapped myself a few times and Max loitered anxiously at my feet. I turned off the water, which was still running in the sink. Outside, I heard nothing but silence. Alice or Bill or Vicky or all 3 of them could still be outside. There was only one way for me to tell. My eyes roamed the bathroom and settled on a wooden bookend that was on a shelf above the toilet. Clutching it, I slowly opened the bathroom door and peered out into the hall. I clamped a hand over my mouth as I saw what looked like Alice standing in the dim light next to the door to the garage. To my right I could see the living room. My purse, which held my wallet and car keys, sat slouched against the coffee table. I shut the door quietly. I got out my phone, went to the security system app. I hit the button I was supposed to use if there were intruders in the house. Alarms immediately blared throughout the house. I heard Alice cry out to herself in surprise, then I heard her little feet pattering down the tiled hallway to the console next to the front door. Even if she had the code, I only needed a few seconds. I lunged into the living room and kicked off hard in the opposite direction after hooking my fingers around my purse. Max followed as we both streaked down the hallway to the garage. I clicked the lock to the vertical position on my way out. Sure, Alice could unlock it, but it might slow her down and I needed all the time I could get. I unlocked the deadbolt on the garage door and flung it open. I couldn't help but emit a shriek when I saw someone standing on the other side, all cloaked in black. When he turned, it was a grin I didn't recognize. Max biting his ankle was all the distraction I needed. As the man howled and went to kick him, I swung the heavy bookend at his temple. It made a meaty thud and the man gasped, tottering forward. I pushed him into the shelves at the opposite end of the garage, and he went down hard, boxes of Christmas lights and gardening supplies showering on top of him. My feet slammed into the pavement as I streaked to my car. I got it unlocked. Max jumped in ahead of me. I twisted the key and started it, tires screeching as I fled the neighborhood. Once I was going and near the neighborhood exit, I started to try and calm myself down. I was panting with fear and adrenaline. I blew through stop signs. Max whined from the passenger seat. I turned off of Rochester Lane after a few minutes, an absolute wreck, certain that there'd be a blockade or something to ruin the freedom I'd worked for. But there was nothing there to stop me. I drove past endless wooden privacy fences, beautiful, 8 feet tall and all stained a uniform, dark color. I tried to calm myself down by reciting the way out of here: left on Inverness, right on Addison, left on Walcott, left merge to the highway. I realized I'd soon be passing the empty field, the bulldozed one next to Aunt Mattie's house, the one where they were going to build more houses. I came closer. I saw a glow. The field was illuminated by a flaming pyre, surrounded by cloaked figures, dressed in black. Story 7, I found an exhilarating new hobby. Some details intentionally left vague to avoid identification. Throughout my childhood I was always the sensitive kid who wanted to follow the rules. I'm unsure if this was part of my German heritage, or perhaps a symptom of my inner voice constantly running a risk analysis which usually objected to the shenanigans of my friends, which likewise is probably why I didn't have very many close ones, and don't really have any today. I live near a large nature reserve, which has lands that sprawl endlessly. As you can imagine, I like to spend much of my time alone, getting lost in the silence. I have a lot of spare time on my hands. I have quite a bit of land, and I decided to turn my DIY hobby into a profitable business by putting up cabins for vacation rentals all over my property, so I would spend time trying to connect to the earth and have a quiet place to read. Oftentimes I head out in my vehicle to just sit and enjoy the outside, staring off into the horizon, or watching out for critters and animals in the distance as I meditate and try to figure out life in a postmodern society, one that says we're all equal. Something that always bothered me was the amount of garbage that I would find strewn throughout the state and federal lands nearby. I've seen endangered animals dead and dying due to people throwing their trash anywhere they please, whether a can of Red Bull, a plastic bag, a television set, or whatever else you can imagine. Anyway, I needed a new hobby, so I decided to do something positive and try to make an impact on something, so I chose to pick a neglected, very hidden recreation area to begin my cleanup. I did 3 or 4 in a week, each time filling the trunk of my SUV completely with litter, mostly cans. Afterwards, I felt good about myself, but during my cleanup, I would feel an incessant rage deep inside that was beginning to flare up. Why would people throw their garbage into nature? Why wouldn't they just throw it in their truck bed, or truck to later throw away? How could someone voluntarily destroy their own home in such a way? These thoughts would cycle endlessly as my inner voice looped, and I could feel the heat down my spine grow hotter and hotter. But in the end, I cleaned up over 10 square miles of sprawl. I not only felt like I did something positive, but I also felt good because this area sat next to my land. About a month later I decided to go for a hike back in the area I had slaved over to clean up, and much to my chagrin, I found fucking cans everywhere, dumped appliances, and even clowns who decided to spray paint their names on multi-million-year-old rocks. I looked nearby and there was the body of an endangered animal rotting. Outside, I was stone cold, but inside, I was absolutely raging. I started to pick up the glass beer bottles and break them on the trail, bottle after bottle, in hopes of slashing one of these fucks' tires. Bottle after bottle I broke off the rocks, and after I was finally done, I gently covered them with just enough dirt to hide them and be an effective saboteur. Then I left, telling myself that I couldn't do this anymore, and I didn't return. Months and months went by. I still haven't been back. I was having a particularly rough week, and I decided to go take my coffee and book out to another place that I used to venture to more often for my much sought after silence, which is partially connected to my property. I had quite a nice time, so I decided to come back the next morning, since now weather had fallen to a more comfortable temperature. Unfortunately, when I arrived, it appeared that some vagrants had thrown toucans onto the trail sometime after I had left the previous day. I tried to hold back my anger as I walked over to toss them in the back of my trunk and went home, as any relaxation I hoped to have was negated by the thoughtlessness of these scum. The next day I returned to try to have a redo and finally have some much needed and sought after relaxation. I pulled up to my spot and took a deep breath and stretched out to the rising sun. I then looked over and saw a Red Bull can in the exact same place I had picked up the 2 cans the previous day. I got back in my car and went home, leaving the can there. Fuck it. The next morning I got up at 0400 and drove back to my spot, this time parking my car a few hundred meters down the road, hidden behind some brush, but with a sight line toward the Red Bull can, and I waited. I read my book in leisure since I didn't have any guests for the next few days. Time was on my side. Eventually, I saw my vagrant pull up in their car and light a cigarette, and I watched as they opened a large can of Arnold Palmer. I felt the rage beginning to flow through my body as if a hunter had finally spotted his big game prize. Yes. Yes. I was going to do it. Yes. Yes. I opened my trunk and carefully removed my .22 caliber rifle from its case, which I had ranged to the exact distance to my target the night before. I watched as the vagrant puffed on their cigarette. About halfway through, I took my time, as I knew crimes of passion get you 20, carefully taping an empty water bottle over the tip of the barrel, to give myself even more cushion, although I knew that nobody would hear me or see me anyway. I waited in a prone position on slight high ground that I carefully picked as to not skyline my target, and I waited. After about 10 minutes, I could see my target take their last sip. They predictably threw their can out of the window, with a smile on their face even, probably knowing they now had a personal assistant picking up their cans now, and then proceeded to flick the automatic window switch on their driver's window. I pulled the trigger, and held back my mirth as the window continued up as my target slumped over in their seat. You might be thinking, well, what did you do with the body? What about their vehicle? Well, to wrap things up without going on much longer, I simply drove it back to my property and stored it in my garage. Then I walked back, making sure to cover up any tire tracks/trail. The next morning, I began an excavation with my bulldozer, and dug a hole large enough to drive the car into. I then proceeded to bury the car. I wasn't too worried about a missing persons report, but just to be sure I covered my bases, I decided to go buy some bags of concrete and building materials, with cash of course, and start the foundation for another new cabin for my guests, just to make sure no satellites or aerial searches could spot my topographic disturbance. That was last year. I've built 3 more cabins since. Story 8, Review your life insurance. Now, I'm not exactly a stranger to the internet. Are any of us these days? I just want to make it clear, I'm not somebody's tech-illiterate great-grandparent spooked by a chain mail. This is something a little stranger than forward to 5 people or you'll die in 5 days. That being said, I could use an overly generous Nigerian prince right now. After losing my job 2 months ago and failing to find anywhere hiring a regretful liberal arts grad, money has been a little tight. I started off optimistic, applying for graduate roles with something almost resembling a decent wage, but after my cat Lacey fell sick and needed emergency veterinary care, the reality of unemployment and my meager savings really kicked in. Since then I've applied for everything from "do you want fries with that?" to those shady spend an hour filling in surveys and get an amazing 25p sites. I even resorted to putting my email on a couple of job-seeking forums. I can only assume that's why these emails started. Most of them were just junk, the usual harmless ads, though my attention was somewhat piqued by one offering to enlarge the penis I didn't even know I had. Another one started to stand out more, though. It started about a week ago. I just returned from another cripplingly expensive veterinary checkup when my phone buzzed. Hoping it'd be work-related, I didn't even give myself time to let Lacey out of her carrier before checking my notifications. No such luck. Review your life insurance, spam, as usual. Lacey's indignant meowing summarized my mood as I briefly considered faking my own death and running off to Mexico with my own insurance money. Nah, if my CV can't even land me a job, the cartels probably wouldn't be hiring either. I didn't take much notice when the same email arrived the next day, either. Only on the third day did I notice the timestamps of each email were exactly the same, 14/27. Some kind of automated spam bot? Frowning a little, I decided to read the email in full. It wasn't as though I'd received any useful messages, anyway. Subject: Review your life insurance. 2, redacted@gmail.com. Hello Jessica. When did you last review your life insurance? Don't let the unexpected leave your loved ones paying the price. Protect your family's finances and put your mind at ease. A little strange, I thought, but not exactly interesting. A quick scan showed me all 3 emails were identical, yet none included any web links, or even a company name. Maybe a draft email someone had automatically scheduled by mistake. It really wasn't interesting enough to dwell upon, so I left it out of my thoughts. I hadn't given it much consideration until today. The emails kept coming, but an unexpected flurry of job interviews kept me from thinking of anything else. 2 never got back in touch. One called this afternoon, congratulating me on my new role as a customer assistant at a local department store. I know, customer service. But you'd better believe I ended that call with the giddiest smile on my face. A job. No more worrying about rental payments or overdue bills. Lacey and I could finally have a little peace. I was just telling my, completely disinterested, cat the good news when I received the email. 14/27, review your life insurance. I'm not sure what made me click on it again. I'd been ignoring it all week, after all. But this time, things were a little different. Subject: Review your life insurance. 2, redacted@gmail.com. Hello Jessica. When did you last review your life insurance? Don't be as fucking useless in death as you are in life. What? Now I've seen some weird marketing campaigns before. Anyone remember a certain pizza chain's tattoo promotion? But dropping the F-bomb and insulting your customers doesn't strike me as a great way of selling your product. Besides, I'm not useless. I make a mean chili con carne, and I can fold a fitted sheet. But I decided to read the rest of the email. Oh, do tell me of my many failings. Internet spam mail. Don't let the unexpected leave your loved ones paying the price. Jessica, you're really not worth the effort. Your mother would have gotten the abortion if she'd known how disappointing you'd turn out to be. You know, she might have made it to Hollywood without that drunken one-night stand giving her the kid she never wanted. What the fuck? My mum had, even by her own account, been every parent's worst nightmare. Stuffed full of arrogance and self-importance, she hadn't let being from a small village in the north of England get in the way of her star-studded dreams. No, she'd made it an entire 50 miles down the country before getting knocked up and fresh as weak and slinking back home to her parents. But that's not exactly something I advertise on my CV. I guess a lot of people dream about being famous. Maybe it's just a weird coincidence. Protect your family's finances and put your mind at ease. You've always been a burden, Jessica. Remember when you were 6, and you stuffed chocolate digestives into the DVD player? Or when you were 10 and threw up in your aunt's brand new Mercedes? How about at 16, putting dish soap in the dishwasher and flooding half of your mother's apartment. You're the mistake that keeps on making more, Jessica. How long will your loved ones have to deal with you? I couldn't pretend this was a coincidence anymore. It must be some kind of joke, a weird prank from a friend or cousin. But who would think to email me at the exact same time for a week? And who would remember such small and petty events in my childhood so vindictively? Jessica, it's time to face the truth. Your life will be one long, tortured regret from start to finish. Your father never bothered to get in touch because he knew what a waste of space you'd become. Your mother could never bear to have more children after seeing how you turned out. Olivia and Irene aren't really your friends. Your consistent fuck-ups just make them feel better about their own, much more successful lives. Alex couldn't manage 6 months of dating without running for the hills, but who can blame him after waking up next to this every day? I could hear the wind beginning to howl outside. Voices beginning to rise next door, my neighbors arguing again. A faint tapping, probably Lacey chasing something around the hall. A peculiar whispering, barely audible, seemed to emanate from the air itself. You have nothing to show for your sorry 22 years on Earth. No real friends. No close family. No partner. A worthless scrap of paper dragging you down into debt, and the kind of job offer you'd expect of a teenager straight out of high school. Do you know how ridiculous you looked, getting so excited over that phone call? It just goes to show how empty and meaningless your life is. You'll take the saddest shit you can get because you know you deserve nothing more. I wasn't reading the email anymore. I wasn't. I didn't have to. The whispering seemed to fill every space, every gap, every molecule of air. It sounded so cold. I didn't know a voice could sound like that, especially one coming from abso-fucking-nowhere. But I hadn't told anyone about the phone call. I hadn't the time to, except for Lacey, and something told me my pet of 8 years wasn't the one sending me hate mail and whispering invisibly about my lifetime of flaws. Nobody could know all of this, except for me, and apparently, the stranger behind the screen. So why bother, Jessica? It's not going to get any better for you. You'll jump from one minimum wage job to the next. You'll go on a few dates, but every man or woman you meet will come to loathe your inherent repulsiveness within a handful of dates. Your friends will ostracize you as they start families of their own and live the luxurious lives you don't even deserve to dream of. Your mother will die young. Cancer, you won't know until the very end. Is that something you want to see, Jessica? Would that give you any meaning? Any purpose? I'm always the first to call my mum, you know. She never offers to visit, or even asks me about my day. When I visit, it always feels like a formality. She always has an appointment to keep me from staying for long. All too convenient, right? Sometimes, it's like she doesn't even want me to look at her. Olivia and Irene and me, we've been best friends since nursery, inseparable. I guess they'd always liked each other a little more, obviously a lot more since they started dating in 6th form. We spoke less and less since they left for Cambridge. Now they're doing their masters, we barely speak at all. I didn't even need to think of any of this. It's like the whispering painted the picture in the air before me, a sickening mirage of desperate, nauseating loneliness. I could see and hear my life feebly unfolding before my very eyes. It had all the warmth and vibrance of a candle flame, slowly flickering out. The whispers were so loud. I didn't know something so quiet could be so deafening. Do the right thing, Jessica. Protect your loved ones today. No one will notice, not really. You'll barely even feel it. I'm not sure what else to write. The whispering won't stop. I recognize the voices now, my mother, my friends, my ex-partner, even an ugly male voice I can only assume is my father. I can't find Lacey. I can hear her scratching, a constant rhythmic tap tap tap, but I can't figure out the source. It's too cold. Cats don't like the cold. I tried to open the door, but it seems stuck somehow. Like there's someone on the other side who doesn't want me to get out. Maybe if I called my mum, this would all be figured out. She'd give me a lecture about reading emails from strange sources, then bustle off to whatever appointment she's invented today. Or I could call Olivia and Irene. I bet they'd find this pretty funny, if they could be bothered to pick up the phone. Nobody's answering. There's no dial tone either. Just this awful silence that makes the whispering seem louder and louder. It's funny, you know. I've never been the type to fall for scams, or scare myself with silly stories or chain letters. But the whispering won't stop. Do you think it'd end if I sent back a reply? Story 9, I was addicted to death. Was being the operative word. You probably already know some of what I'm about to tell you based on the title, but that's not the whole of it. Let me back up. This whole thing started when I graduated from Yale. I was only 20, having graduated a year early with excellent grades, and my friends, actually, invited me to a party to celebrate. As you can probably guess, I'd never been to a party before, not in college, and definitely not in high school, and I thought this might be my last chance, so I agreed. In hindsight, maybe I should have continued my antisocial streak. It should be equally obvious that I'd never done any drugs, unless you count coffee, which is a hell of a drug when you're trying to finish a 10-page research paper at 1:43 a.m. with your orchestral movie score playlist blasting in a futile attempt to drown out the party next door because you forgot to do one out of your 47 assignments until the night before it was due. The point is, I'm not usually much of a partier, but when my friend Jesse offered me something called Optimum, which was apparently the newest and safest hallucinogen on the market, not that that's saying much, it only took 5 odd minutes of hounding before I gave in and agreed to try it. Jesse may not have been the best choice of friend, but it was college. He said it would help me relax for once in my life, which I was very much on board with. But when he pulled what looked suspiciously like your average stick of gum out of his pocket, I was fairly sure I had befriended an idiot who had been ripped off by his dealer. I was about to tell him as much when it hit me. I can't remember much after that, only flashes of various burning liquids, sex that I may or may not have been involved in, singing that was poor at best, and possibly more drugs. The one thing I remember somewhat vividly was being knocked off the 3rd-floor balcony. I can't remember hitting the pavement, but that might have something to do with the fact that my skull cracked on impact. When I woke a few days later with a crushing migraine and a tongue like cotton, they told me my heart had stopped, that I died. But they didn't need to tell me, because I already knew. I don't mean I saw heaven, or hell, or even some bright light, and I'm definitely not a zombie, but for a while I was truly at peace. There was no stress, no pressure, and no one was going to make me do anything. I knew I was dead, and I liked it. So it didn't surprise me when the doctors told me my heart had stopped. What did surprise me was the time. I had been dead for under a minute, since the EMTs were able to revive me in the ambulance, but the peace I experienced felt like it could have lasted days. I had gone through 15 years of studying 15 hours a day, never going out to friends' houses or parties or even just the park, sacrificing everything just to get a better letter on a piece of paper. But after that warm nothingness, I was hooked. I didn't want to die, not in the traditional sense, I just wanted some peace, just for a little while. After months of resisting that desire, I gave in. I killed myself. But because I didn't want to die permanently, I took as many precautions as I could think of, making sure I stayed as safe as I could. I knew no doctor, nor even a medical student, would sacrifice their career to help me get a fix, so I roped Jesse into helping me come back from the dead. It served him right for always pressuring me to do things with him. He was antsy about it at first, but I offered to pay him, and that was enough to change his mind. After a few times, he started pulling out his phone as soon as I tightened the noose around my neck, tapping away as I choked and gasped for air. He always revived me 60 seconds later with CPR, which sometimes lasted longer than either of us were comfortable with. It was never pleasant, the transition between life and death, but I had what felt like days in that other, peaceful world just to relax. Eventually, though, I got tired of the sore throats and bruised ribs. So Jesse and I started finding more and more efficient ways to die and to come back. It wasn't perfect, and I was spending tons of money on epinephrine to restart my heart, but we were getting better. Unfortunately, my tolerance seemed to be building, and each time I went under seemed shorter than the last. I couldn't risk extending it past the 60 seconds. It was getting harder and harder for Jessie to revive me after the repeated damage my body had undergone, so I was staying dead long past 1 minute already. The only thing I could do was increase the frequency, which is how I went from dying once a month to at least twice a week. Jesse wasn't happy, but his concerns about liability faded slightly every time I increased his pay. I did, however, have to buy a defibrillator to start jolting my heart into gear once Jesse restarted it, plus an oxygen mask just in case. The last time I died was about 2 months ago. Jesse had to use everything we had to bring me back, and when I opened my eyes he was practically hyperventilating. I had been gone for 7 minutes, he said, and he had almost given up. He should have. Resuscitation after that long, even if successful, runs the risk of irreparable brain damage. That's not the only reason he should have given up, as I soon discovered. I couldn't tell how long I was under, but it was a long time, and for the first time, there was something more than nothing. I don't know what it was I found, but it felt like an opening. A door, perhaps, to where I would have gone. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I was pulled out so abruptly that I didn't get a chance to look past the door, or to shut it. And ever since then, I've been followed by people that aren't really here. I don't think they're ghosts, at least, they don't seem that way. I don't know how, but I get the sense that they're more like security. They don't want people coming and going freely, uninvited. They want me to come back with them, but I'm not ready to leave. I don't want to die. The worst part, believe it or not, is the withdrawal. I swear that's what it is. My head aches worse than it did that first time I cracked my skull. I'm shivering with cold no matter how warm it is, and I can't stand the mere thought of eating, or even just taking a sip of water. I want more than anything to go back to that peaceful place, but if I do, I know they'll never let me go. For now, the people that aren't here are just watching, but, no. I was wrong. They're waiting. Story 10, my mommy makes the best spaghetti. My mommy makes the best spaghetti. She always makes it perfect. The spaghetti at school is either too hard or too squishy. Not even the other kids or teachers like it. My mommy always makes it exactly right. She knows I don't like tomato sauce, so she only gives me spaghetti and salt and butter. I love the fluffy salt and butter. She even makes it for me when I've been bad. My daddy doesn't like it when my mommy makes spaghetti. He always complains and makes mommy sad. Sometimes he yells at her and she cries. I don't know why he has to be so mean when his food tastes really gross. I don't like it when he makes spaghetti. I love my mommy and I hate my daddy. My mommy always tucks me in bed and makes sure to give me tummy rubs when I don't feel good. She reads me a story and kisses my head. She whispers that she loves me in my ear before standing up and turning off the light. She always leaves the door open just slightly so some of the hallway light shines in my room. I am a big girl, I'm 6.5. I don't need a nightlight anymore, but I sleep better with the hallway light. My daddy never reads me a story. He always sets his glass bottle on my nightstand and I can smell how gross his drink is. I hate that smell. Daddy's breath always smells like his gross, brown drink. He also shuts the door all the way when he leaves. I don't like the dark, but I'm not afraid of monsters anymore. He never kisses my head or tells me he loves me. But it's okay, because I hate him. My mommy stays at home with me every day now. It's so fun to be with her all day. We play tag and we play with my Barbies. She even turns into a tickle monster and sometimes I have to hide from her. I can't hide too good though, because she gets really sad if she can't find me. After we play she gives me my favorite food, spaghetti. My daddy always comes home very late. It's almost bedtime when he comes home. He never wants to play tag or Barbies. Even when I hide, he gets angry at me. Mommy just hides in her bedroom when he's mad. He always has that gross smelling bottle. It makes me sick. Daddy gets mad when I am sick. I can't help it when I feel sick. Sometimes I can't make it to the toilet and he has to clean it up. I know that Daddy hates me too. Lately, Mommy and Daddy have been yelling a lot. When I try to play with them to make them feel better, they yell at me to go to my room. That always makes me cry. Daddy always has such mad eyes. Mommy's eyes are always watery. Why is he so mean to us? Last night, I heard Mommy crying and I wanted to see what was wrong. I thought she was sick too, and I knew I could take care of her. But when I got there, Daddy came out of the room and I saw Mommy sleeping. He had his gross bottle in his hand. When he saw me, he picked me up. I screamed for Mommy, but she didn't come for me. Does she hate me now too? Why does she hate me? Daddy got some of his gross bottled drink on me. It was red on my penguin pajamas. Where was he taking me? We got to the car and Daddy locked the door when I tried to run back and get Mommy. He tied me down in my seat and I cried. He didn't care. I tried to hit him. He told me that things were going to be better. I miss Mommy. I hate spaghetti now. My mommy always made it the best. Daddy never makes it the way I like it. He gives me spaghetti and salt and butter, but his salt is gritty and gross. I don't like his salt. We live in a new house, and I go to school again. I hate school, but I have a friend. I play tag and Barbies with her. Daddy still never plays. He sits and watches me with his gross drink. His drink doesn't make me sick anymore. He doesn't look angry at me anymore. He tucks me into bed now and kisses me on my head. He whispers that he loves me in my ear. He still shuts the door all the way, but it's okay. I'm not scared of monsters. I don't have to sleep with my air machine anymore, and instead Daddy bought me lots and lots of stuffed animals. Maybe I do love my daddy. Story 11. It should have been a simple job. I've been working as a professional deep-sea diver most of my life. Never bothered with college. I joined the Navy right after high school and stayed for 3 years. I hated it. I've never been one to take kindly to orders I can't reason through myself, so needless to say, I did a lot better in the private sector. Deep-sea diving was my passion. I got my first diving gig contracting, ironically, for the Navy in my hometown of Corpus Christi. Those were some of the best years of my life. I met the woman that would become my wife, married her, had 2 kids, all while taking a more managerial position at my diving firm. The job was fun as hell, and the pay wasn't so bad either. Some funny shit happened, as well as some weird shit, but nothing worth posting here. My life was great until I came home to my lovely bride getting pegged by some douche from the country club she talked me into joining. The divorce was a living hell, and since the judge took an issue with my job being in a high-risk sector, she got the kids. To top it all off, a week after we settled, she moved to Maine. Fucking Maine. About as far as a person can get from Texas without jumping the border. Of course, if I wanted to keep seeing my kids every other weekend, I had to leave my deep-sea diving job and follow her, which is what I did. I managed to snag a cute little cabin on Big Sebago Lake and a mid-level management job at a shipping firm in Portland, but life wasn't the same. After a year of monotony, I finally talked one of my drinking buddies into letting me moonlight at his brother's lake diving company. Now, this was more of a gig-based job, seeing that there wasn't that much shit in lakes to be recovered and not that many people that had the liquid assets to afford our services. Most of what we did was government work. The county hired us to rip up invasive plants in the lakes. We got paid by the truckload, so, needless to say, there were a lot of weeds that needed removing. It certainly wasn't the same as hitting bottom in the Gulf of Mexico, but hell, it was something. The curious thing about lakes in Maine is their surprising depth. Unlike other lakes that are the result of simple rainwater and erosion, the bodies of water in this area were carved out tens of thousands of years ago by mile-high glaciers scraping across the continent. This led to some puny lakes that can be far deeper than you'd expect, which can complicate my weed removal efforts. Now to the actual incident which inspired me to make a post here. It should have been a simple job: dive down with some garbage bags, fill them up with milfoil, throw the bags in the truck, and drive them down to the county dump. We were working this deceptively small lake between my place and Portland. The location was good, but it had rained hard the night before and the sun had gone down by the time we got there, so visibility was shot. They'd only paid us for one truckload, so it was a two-man job. Me and my colleague, I won't call him my friend, because he's a damn loudmouth, Daryl, threw on our suits and crept along the bottom of the lake. This is where shit got fucked up. We were about halfway done when I noticed a cinder block with a rope attached to it, stretching up toward the surface. Normally, this is no strange sight, it's how people anchor their floats and shit, and I do the same thing for the inflatable I bought for my kids. Problem is, my depth finder was reading 120 feet, and I knew for a fact we were nowhere near the shoreline. I didn't notice anything that would require this type of anchor while I was shoreside, but at the time, I wrote that off to it being pretty damn dark. I was about to move on when, while grabbing around for more weeds, I noticed a set of car keys sitting right next to the cinder block. Half buried in the mud, I paused and looked up the rope, seeing nothing but more murky water. People lose shoes, hair ties, and other clothing-related shit while on floats, but who would bring their car keys out into the middle of the lake and be careless enough to lose them? In maybe one of the most impactful decisions of my life, I decided to swim up and check it out. The first thing that came into view through the muddied water was a pair of shoes, bound together and attached to the cinder block below me by the thick rope I'd been following. Now, being a deep-sea diver, I'm no stranger to gruesome shit, but what I saw next was more than enough to make me spit out a couple things I can't say around my kids. As I swam up, more came into view. Legs that were bound together with duct tape, arms restrained in the same fashion, and then a man's head with a duct-taped mouth and wild, empty eyes that still seemed to plead for some kind of savior. I immediately recognized that he'd been dead for some time, due to the severe bloating and the fact that he was still floating. Certainly not my first corpse, but the sight of the whole thing sent me moving backwards and calling for Daryl over the radio. My yelling was interrupted when I bumped into something behind me that seemed to respond and give a little. I looked straight down before turning around and my worst fears were confirmed. A rope shot up out of the dark, and attached to it was a dead female body, bound and gagged in the same manner. Reeling in shock, I turned on my high-intensity lights. Despite their short battery life, they work wonders at seeing through mud, and realized that I was submerged in a forest of corpses. I freaked out. I'll admit it. I screamed for Daryl to get your fucking ass the fuck over here right fucking now and started swimming straight up to get away from the crowd. That's when I heard the splash above. A cinder block shot past me, sinking out of my view fast. I immediately looked up and saw a woman, still alive, still conscious, sinking with it, bound just like all the corpses. I grabbed onto her as best I could, reached down, grabbed my knife, and managed to cut through the rope in a couple seconds. By this time, Daryl had found my grim discovery, and I yelled at him to check his locator and meet me at the surface. I swam hard to break into the open night air and tore the duct tape off the woman's mouth. I hastily removed my mask to try and give her some sense of humanity, then yelled at Daryl to get the rest of the tape off her body. I hastily glanced around the lake, searching for whoever had almost killed this woman, and I saw a dinky little motorboat speeding away. I hollered something at it, I don't remember what, but it quickly turned into a cove. I didn't follow it. We got her to the shore, where she told us her name, Valerie. Before we got in the truck, I asked, "Are you hurt? We should probably head to the hospital." "Yeah, son of a bitch gave me a wicked couple of bruises." "Where are we?" "Forest Lake. Outside of Wyndham." "The fuck? I was just in Augusta." This struck me as strange. It's a little over an hour trip to Augusta, and not one you could make on accident. "Well, either way, the closest hospital's in Portland, so we might as well get going." The 30-minute drive was mostly quiet. We didn't have any change of clothes, so we all sat soggy in the cab of the truck. I guess Daryl eventually worked up the nerve to say something to her. Not trying to be a dick, but, how did he get you? Excuse me? How did you almost get murdered? What happened in between you sitting pretty in Augusta and you sinking into a lake? She went quiet, and then spoke more softly than before. I guess I got into his car. I'm sorry, but what? You got into a car with some random fucker in the middle of the night and dash. No. Valerie interrupted him. I got into a car with my boyfriend. In the middle of the goddamn day. He picked me up from work, and, next thing I know, I'm not looking at my boyfriend but this weirdo with crazy eyes, and I started to scream but he already had a needle in my neck. Next thing I know I'm awake in his dockhouse, bound and gagged. I tried to reason through this explanation. So this guy impersonated your boyfriend? No. She insisted. It was my boyfriend. More than an impersonation. It was just like him. Looks, mannerisms, everything. Then he just changed, or something. I don't fucking know. That shut the both of us up. We didn't bother with small talk for the rest of the ride. At the time I'm writing this, Valerie is back in Augusta, but I wouldn't call it a happy ending. The local papers picked up the story, and no one ever found a trace of her boyfriend. The cops searched the whole lake and found nothing, but we did hear that this guy was the latest in a string of missing people in the state, all of whom knew each other in some way or another. I try not to think about this episode a lot and focus on my job and my kids. In fact, the only reason I'm even writing any of this down is to try and flush it out of my brain once and for all. I think that might have backfired. While I was thinking about that night, something, I guess a rogue memory, popped into my head that I hadn't thought about before. When I saw that little motorboat speed away, I think I did get a look at who was in it, and I guess my brain wisely shoved the image away, because it doesn't make much goddamn sense. I could barely make it out in the moonlight, but looking back at me, as I helped keep Valerie afloat, was not a man, but another Valerie, a panicked, angry Valerie, wearing different clothes and a deep, bone-chilling scowl that I'm very sure was directed at me.